Hello everybody, and how are you? I hope you're well. And if you're not, I hope that we can provide some light entertainment for you while you are being not so well. So what are we doing? Oh, yes, I should explain, sorry. We have closed captions. I don't know how much, I can't change where they are on your screen. You can choose if you show them or not. I don't know how accurate they are either. Sorry about that. If you don't want them, I'm pretty sure you're allowed to turn them off at your end by clicking on the screen. But I'm not quite sure how yet, because it doesn't show up on the sending end for me. It shows up on the receiving end in the browser or app or whatever you're using. And it will be a little bit of a challenge to see how accurate it is, because apparently I speak much more like an English person than an Australian person or even a New Zealand person, which they did have New Zealand English as one of the choices, but it made far less mistakes when I chose English, not Australian or New Zealand English, which technically I'm meant to be speaking New Zealand English. But maybe because of the sort of books I read, I sound a little bit more British English. We'll find out, shall we? This is going to be a new challenge. I've just glanced across at my my browser window on my other monitor, and I can see it's cutting me off at this point here on my face because of where the text is. And I know the settings for it, but I'm not sure if I can access them from here to be able to change it for you. I'm just now waiting for my computer to do something because I clicked a button. And I haven't yet seen anything showing up that would... Let's see if it will give me a size. Maybe that's what it is, something like size. Source, when, language, output to, number of lines, capitalization. It's not showing me anything about the size of the text. I'm sorry. I would actually condense it down so it would be smaller if I could, so that you would not be getting, you wouldn't have to choose between watching me and watching the text. Okay, I can't change anything there at the moment, so we shall carry on reading. And if you don't want to have the captions, I'm sorry, I don't know how to turn them off for you. It doesn't show on the particular window I'm seeing on the other page, because it's my moderators page. It's not a standard stream view page. Too many new things all at once. I had to update my computer. I thought it was going to be straightforward. Everything seemed to be working okay. And then when I went and opened OBS to get ready for streaming today, after having done a whole lot of other work for other things, my real life work, half of the panels were missing on the thing that I normally look at that tells me what's happening with chat and what the title of the stream is, which is where I edit it. So it now says rewards and fairies on the notification and the title underneath what you see on the stream, instead of more William and that sort of stuff. And it didn't have that information. I'm like, oh no. So I tried turning it off and on again, which worked for the panels. But then I was getting this random as strange set of voices coming through from somewhere. Who knows where? I don't. They were coming through my wired headset, which is the one that's plugged in. So it wasn't a crossed connection with someone else's Bluetooth or anything else like that. My browser wasn't showing anything else open, and also my browser has a little indicator when a tab is playing something, where the sound being produced by a website that tab is for, and none of that was showing. There wasn't even an extra window open in the background that was hidden. Nothing. So we turned it off and we turned it on again. Not the computer, just the stream program. And in the meantime, because I'd accidentally turned off my camera, not my microphone, to see if it was because the sound was being picked up from somewhere else, because apparently my microphone's reasonably sensitive. Because I turned off the camera, that means I then had to restart the camera color management. Oh, it's so complicated. Don't do it. Don't do it. Keep it simple. Just do it on your phone, where you just balance your phone somewhere and you look at it and you talk to it. And that's it. That was what I used to do when I first started reading Millie Molly Mandy books. So if you've randomly come here from somewhere else, yes, I'm just nattering at the moment, but I will get into reading the story in a minute, very shortly. I'm just sort of getting this off my chest so it's not bothering me anymore. I think that's about it. I will be looking at what the subtitles are doing and seeing if I can change that sometime. Not now, because that will also require opening up another browser, because my normal browser, it doesn't want to play with it. The browser, there's nothing wrong with the browser, but the way the program's been set up is a bit fussy. It only works with one browser. Because whoever's designed it likes the way that browser works and they don't want to have to do anything else. And also, if I start opening up other browser windows, I'm going to have, I'm looking over at my other monitor here. I've got a meter on the side of the monitor, and it says what the CPU usage is and what the RAM usage is, what the percentages are for the different cores of my CPU, and all that sort of technical stuff, which I don't actually have the skills to work with, but I do know that when it gets up really high, like over 90% on the RAM usage, don't click anything, just let it keep thinking, and it will sort itself out. If you start clicking on things, lots of different things, it will throw its hands up in the air, toss all the toys out of the cot, have a hissy fit, and close whatever it is that you're currently trying to do, regardless of whether you're meant to be having it closed or not. So don't do it. And then the CPU usage, it's just like, oh yes, no wonder it's sluggish. Anyway, so we're currently working. I can tell because on my other monitor I can see me talking and waving my hands around and the words across the bottom of the screen. And so that means the captioning's working. Yay! And Lems probably is going to miss out on that today, even though she's the one I was thinking of when I set them up, because I know she's like me. She prefers to have subtitles on, because when you're listening to something, sometimes it helps if you can see the words as well. You don't focus on the words that are written on the screen, but you're just aware of them, and it helps to clarify some things, even if randomly having captions from some AI somewhere gives you some really weird interpretations of what's been said. I had a bit of a practice yesterday or the day before with some of the poems that we have in our new book. Some of the words it copes with really well. Some of the words it's like, what are you talking about? Anyway, so if the poem doesn't make sense by reading the captions or subtitles, whatever you want to call them, then just listen. So, with all of that, we're going to start reading Rewards and Fairies by Rudyard Kipling, which is actually the sequel to Puck of Pook's Hill, which we had Dan and Una with the two children who were living in a house just across the fields and the streams from Pook's Hill, and they met Puck, and he introduced them to characters from English history, British history actually, not English history, from characters within the history of the British Isles. And so Rewards and Fairies is kind of a sequel to that. We have the same characters in it, including Puck, and I'm pretty sure we have Dan and Una in it. We also have poems like we did in the other one, but I think some of our story is actually going to not be in England or even Scotland. I don't even think it's in Ireland or Wales or anywhere else that's in the British Isles. And I'm not going to say the UK because Ireland is not part of the UK. Anyway, so to start, you need to know some things. It's a good idea to have something to drink to keep yourself hydrated, because we're going to be reading or talking and reading for an hour, an hour and a quarter, an hour and a half, sometimes an hour and 3/4. And you really shouldn't let yourself get dehydrated. It's a very good way to keep your brain working well. I've got water. Water's brilliant for keeping you hydrated. Anytime you put something into your water, your body doesn't take it up as readily as it does just plain water. So something to drink, something to eat, and I've got my Dutch biscuits here again. I should get 1 or 2 out so I don't have to rattle quite so loudly like it is now. Sorry. When I get to that stage, like in the chapter breaks. Chapter breaks. Sorry, I'm talking to my captioning thing now. So I've got my Dutch biscuits, speculaas. That one I think is meant to be an elephant. See, he's got the cover on his back, and I think that's an elephant's trunk, and there's his legs there. What do you think? Is that meant to be a stylised elephant? That would be quite appropriate for us reading a Rudyard Kipling book, since, oh, there's another one. I've got 2 elephants, and I've never managed to figure out what this one's meant to be. You tell me. That way, or that way, or that way, or that way. What's it meant to be? Do you know? I can't tell. I've always looked at it that way as my main way of looking at it, but I still don't know what it's meant to be. Some of the pictures you can tell what they are, and some of them you can't. The classic ones that most people think of are, I think it's a little Dutch boy and girl standing facing each other on the picture. Anyway, they're all made with a special mould, and the dough is pressed into the mould, or the mould is pressed onto the dough. I'm not sure which it is. We actually went to more random stuff before we start reading, but I found it quite exciting at the time. When we were over in the Netherlands in 2019, before the world fell apart, when we were in the Netherlands in 2019, we did a little bit of sightseeing, because you do. I mean, it's not where you live. It's thousands and thousands and thousands of kilometres or miles, you take your pick, away from where you normally live. And to leave New Zealand, you have to use either a boat or an aeroplane. There's probably some other ways you can do it, but they're the easiest ones. Definitely not swimming, because it's over 1,000 nautical miles. That's a long way. Nautical miles are a lot bigger than kilometres or even normal standard non-metric miles. So yes, once you get to Europe, you make the most of your opportunity. We were staying with friends and relations and seeing lots of different places. And one of the places we went to was a working windmill. And it was actually a mill. It wasn't a pump. A lot of the things that we see in pictures of the Netherlands that we think of as windmills are actually wind pumps. And they were built to use the power of the wind turning the sails to then turn all the gears inside to actually pump water out of the drainage ditches that were alongside the paddocks into the canals that were alongside those drainage ditches, so that the land could actually be farmed, because otherwise it was underwater. They were wonderful at their engineering of soil, of ground and water, and they are still very good at it, because a lot of their landmass otherwise would just be part of the North Sea. And it's a bit hard for a country if all your neighbours have taken all your good land, because it's up in the hills, and they've left you with the swampy bit round the edge of the sea. And so you want to make a decent living for yourself, so you get out there and you do something about it. And they did. They got out there and they did something about it. And the whole, the little boy with the hole in the dike poking his finger in the hole to stop it leaking, it's just urban myth. It's a nice idea. There's no way that you stop water coming through soil, clay, dirt, by putting your finger in a small hole, because all of the surrounding dirt mass is softened, and you're not going to stop it that way. Just being logical here. Sorry. My other drink, I have my homemade iced coffee, which is actually just a double shot of espresso topped up with cold milk. And something on my desk is making a noise. I think it's because I bumped my phone. And so the container holding something else made a noise. Here we go. We're going to read now. I'm going to stop yattering, yattering, chatting, whatever. Yeah, and normally in chapter breaks is when I chat. If you're new here, again, I don't think I said this before properly. I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's stories, and I eventually stop actually chatting and read old-fashioned children's stories. Today's story is some of the chapters and poems from the beginning part of Rewards and Fairies by Rudyard Kipling, and some of the attitudes from old-time writers are not our modern attitudes, and so instead of censoring them and saying, no, we won't have anything like that, we actually decide that we're going to be wise and grown up and adult about it and learn from it. Okay, there's an attitude. It's not a modern attitude. We don't agree with it. We don't have to behave in the same manner that they did at the time, and we can see how far we've come as a people. So don't complain if you don't like the attitude in some of the books. That's just the way it was back then. And we can learn from it. So let's get on with reading and stop with the lecturing. Right, Rewards and Fairies by Rudyard Kipling. A charm. Take of English earth as much as either hand may rightly clutch. In the taking of it breathe prayer for all who lie beneath. Not the great nor well bespoke, but the mere uncounted folk, of whose life and death is none report or lamentation. Lay that earth upon thy heart, and thy sickness shall depart. It shall sweeten and make whole fevered breath and festered soul. It shall mightily restrain over busy hand and brain. It shall ease thy mortal strife 'gainst the immortal woe of life, till thy restored power shall prove by what grace the heavens do move. Take of English flowers these, spring's full-faced primroses, summer's wild, wide-hearted rose, autumn's wallflower of the close, and thy darkness to illume winter's bee-thronged ivy bloom. Seek and serve them where they bide, from Candlemas to Christmas-tide, for these simples used aright shall restore a failing sight. These shall cleanse and purify webbed and inward turning eye. These shall show thee treasure hid, thy familiar fields amid, at thy threshold, on thy hearth, or about thy daily path, and reveal which is thy need, every man a king indeed. There you go. And that's our first poem from Rewards and Fairies. And now we have the introduction. Once upon a time, Dan, Una, brother and sister, living in the English country, had the good fortune to meet with Puck, alias Robin Goodfellow, alias Nick O'Lincoln, alias Lob Lie by the Fire, the last survivor in England of those whom mortals call fairies. Their proper name, of course, is the People of the Hills. This Puck, by means of the magic of oak, ash and thorn, sorry, I'm just getting this set up so that I can prop it up, otherwise I end up with sore wrists. This Puck, by means of the magic of oak, ash and thorn, gave the children power. Power to see what they should see and hear what they should hear, though it should have happened 3,000 year. In other words, a long time ago. Is that? Yes, it's going to stay. Wonderful. That's good. The result was that from time to time, and in different places on the farm and in the fields and the country about, they saw and talked to some rather interesting people. One of these, for instance, was a knight of the Norman conquest, another a young centurion of a Roman legion stationed in England, another a builder and decorator of King Henry VII's time, and so on and so forth, as I have tried to explain in a book called Puck of Pook's Hill. A year or so later, the children met Puck once more, and though they were older then and wiser, and wore boots regularly instead of going barefooted when they got the chance, Puck was as kind to them as ever and introduced them to more people of the old days. Yeah, that was something I mentioned previously. In New Zealand, because the climate is rather much more mild than it is in England, and we're a lot less proper compared with the time period that this was set and the part of society that the children are from. New Zealand children, if you're not in the city, if you're out in the country, generally children run around in bare feet as long as possible, and that can go up to being an adult. And I have to confess, I've got bare feet right at the moment. Doesn't have to stop when you're a child. But yes, it used to be quite an indicator of the age of a child. Things like whether they wore shoes or bare feet. This is as long as wealth or lack of it was not an issue. Poor children were often barefooted, but those who were not poor, those who were well-to-do working class or middle class, definitely upper class, they probably were not allowed bare feet at all. But other children, when they went from, I don't have a particular number, but when they went from being small children to bigger children, they then wore boots or shoes all the time. And another indicator was, and it happened even when my dad was growing up, was that boys went from wearing short pants, sometimes called knickerbockers, depending on the era. Our last book, the William books, are set in the period where boys, when they're younger, wear short pants that are fastened just below the knee, and they were called knickerbockers, also, which is the name is shortened to knickers. And even when my dad was a kid, when you were young, you had short pants, and then you graduated to long pants when you're an adult. Unless you're working on a farm and it's summer and it's a little bit more modern era, and then you go into shorts it's a lot more comfortable as long as your legs are safe. Anyway, so we'll ignore all that. Puck was as kind to them as ever and introduced them to more people of the old days. He was careful, of course, to take away their memory of their walks and conversations afterwards, but otherwise he did not interfere, and Dan and Una would find the strangest sort of persons in their gardens or woods. In the stories that follow, I am trying to tell something about those people. And that's the end of the introduction. So, additional aside here, I'm thinking that they don't remember the instances of what was happening, but they did remember a general impression of something to do with history that they had learned. Otherwise, I don't think Puck would have bothered. Anyway, next chapter, proper chapter, Cold Iron. Sorry. I will do my chapter break thing and have a drink of water, sorry. Next chapter, Cold Iron. When Dan and Una had arranged to go out before breakfast, they did not remember it was midsummer morning. That was how they first met Puck. Okay? They only wanted to see the otter, which old Hobden said had been fishing their brook for weeks, and early morning was the time to surprise him. As they tiptoed out of the house into the wonderful stillness, the church clock struck 5. Dan took a few steps across the dew-blobbed lawn and looked at his black footprints. "I think we ought to be kind to our poor boots," he said. "They'll get horrid wet." It was their first summer in boots, and they hated them, so they took them off and slung them round their necks and paddled joyfully over the dripping turf where the shadows lay the wrong way, like evening in the east. The sun was well up and warm, but by the brook the last of the night mist still fumed off the water. They picked up the chain of Otter's footprints on the mud and followed it from the bank, between the weeds and the drenched mowing, while the birds shouted with surprise. Then the track left the brook and became a smear, as though a log had been dragged along. They traced it into 3 Cows Meadow, over the mill sluice to the forge, round Hobden's garden, and then up the slope till it ran out on the short turf and fern of Pook's Hill, and they heard the cock-pheasants crowing in the wood behind them. "No use," said Dan, questing like a puzzled hound. "The dew's drying off, and old Hobden says otters'll travel for miles." "I'm sure we've travelled miles." Una fanned herself with her hat. "How still it is. It's going to be a regular roaster. Hot." She looked down the valley where no chimney yet smoked. Hobden's up. Dan pointed to the open door of the Forge cottage. What do you suppose he has for breakfast? One of them. He says they eat good all times of year. Una jerked her head at some stately pheasants going down to the brook for a drink. A few steps farther on, a fox broke out, almost under their bare feet, yapped and trotted off. Ah, Muss Reynolds, Dan was quoting from old Hobden. If I knowed all you knowed, I'd know something. I say, Una lowered her voice, you know that funny feeling of things having happened before? I felt it when you said Muss Reynolds, as in master, but with an accent. So did I, said Dan. What is it? They faced each other, stammering with excitement. Wait a shake. I'll remember in a minute. Wasn't it something about a fox? Last year. Oh, I nearly had it then, Dan cried. Be quiet, said Una, prancing excitedly. There was something happened before we met the fox last year. Hills, Broken Hills, the play at the theatre. See what you see. I remember now, Dan shouted. It's as plain as the nose on your face. Pook's Hill, Puck's Hill, Puck. I remember too, said Una. And it's Midsummer Day again. Just a refresher for those who don't remember. And yes, I'm sorry, I can't make the captions actually catch some of the words properly. Pook's Hill, not Cook's Hill. It's probably just not a word that's in its vocabulary. Now it thinks I said books hell. Oh well. Lots of fun. Right. So a refresher for those who have heard the previous book. And if you're new here and you haven't heard it, I'll tell you anyway. The children had been going to put on a play that was, I don't know, I can't remember if we even knew what it was. It was something that they were reciting. It may have actually been a poem, not a play. And so they were reciting it and they were walking around this area that they referred to as, what did they refer to it as? They went past an area that they used as a little theatre, and they'd been in bare feet, and they walked around it and practiced this poem that they were going to say 3 times. And apparently that was how Puck arrived, is because they had called him, they had summoned him by reciting this poem 3 times as they walked around the theatre. So we shall carry on reading. I remember too, said Una, and it's Midsummer Day again. Yes, that's what it was, as it happened on Midsummer's Day. The young fern on a knoll rustled, and Puck walked out, chewing a green-topped rush. Good midsummer morning to you. Here's a happy meeting, said he. They shook hands all round and asked questions. You've wintered well, he said after a while, and looked them up and down. Nothing much wrong with you, seemingly. They've put us into boots, said Una. Look at my feet, they're all pale and white, and my toes are squidged together awfully. Yes, boots make a difference. Puck wriggled his brown, square, hairy foot and dropped a dandelion flower between the big toe and the next. I could do that last year, said Dan dismally as he tried and failed, and boots simply ruin one's climbing because you're not using your toes the same way like you use fingers. When you're in bare feet, you tend to use your toes independently a lot more, especially if you practice picking things up with them. I know somebody who can pinch very, very hard just by using their big toe and their next toe. You'd feel this foot come up to you under the table and you get this pinch that really hurt. And all it was their big toe and their next toe, because they'd practiced it enough to develop the dexterity and the muscles. Anyway, we'll carry on. Boots simply ruin one's climbing. There must be some advantage to them, I suppose, said Puck, or folk wouldn't wear them. Shall we come this way? Yeah, probably the fact that it's stones on the road and most people don't toughen their feet up enough. They sauntered along side by side till they reached the gate at the far end of the hillside. Here they halted, just like cattle, and let the sun warm their backs while they listened to the flies in the wood. Little Linden's awake, said Una as she hung with her chin on the top rail. See, the chimney smoke. So Little Lindens is another farmstead, another farmhouse. And I was going to say before, they talked about 3 cows. That's the name of one of the paddocks, or one of the fields. Modern farms often have the paddocks numbered because there's so many of them, but in the old days they used to actually name the paddocks. We have a park next door to us which has donkeys in it, and each of the paddocks there is named because it's easier to understand which is which, even if you haven't used the names before. When someone tells you that's where it is, you've got a bit more of an idea of where to go. And often it's characteristics of the field, either something that's happened there or something that's distinctive about the field. Anyway, Little Lindens is awake, said Una as she hung with her chin on the top rail. See the chimney smoke. Today's Thursday, isn't it? Said Puck, said Puck, turning to look at the old pink farmhouse across the little valley. Mrs. Vincey's baking day. Bread should rise well this weather. He yawned, and that sent them both yawning. Yes, yeast in bread dough works better when it's warm. So warm weather helps the bread to rise before you bake it. Instead of having to actually put heat around it, you want gentle heat initially before you cook it. The bracken about rustled and ticked and shook in every direction. They felt that little crowds were stealing past. Doesn't that sound like, the people of the hills? Said Una. It's the birds and wild things drawing up to the woods before people get about, said Puck, as though he were Ridley the keeper. Oh, we know that. I only said it sounded like. As I remember, the people of the hills used to make more noise. They'd settle down for the day rather like small birds settling down for the night. But it was in the days when they carried the high hand. Oh me, the deeds that I've had act and part in, you'd scarcely believe, said Puck. I like that, said Dan. After all you told us last year, too. Only the minute you went away you made us forget everything, said Una. Puck laughed and shook his head. I shall this year too. I've given you Season of Old England. I'm not quite sure what he means there. I'll spell it for you so you know why I'm not sure. Seizin. I'm waiting for the captions to keep up. Yes, it did actually spell it correctly. It understood my letters. Okay, season. I don't understand. It's not a season like summer, autumn, winter. I think it's to do with taking hold of or binding up of old England, and I've taken away your doubt and fear, but your memory and remembrance between whiles I'll keep where old Billy Trot kept his night lines, and that's where he could draw 'em up and hide 'em as need. Does that suit? He twinkled mischievously. It's got to suit, said Una, and laughed. We can't magic back at you. She folded her arms and leaned against the gate. Suppose now you wanted to magic me into something, an otter. Could you? Not with those boots round your neck. I'll take them off. She threw them on the turf. Dan's followed immediately. Now, she said. Less than ever now you've trusted me. Where there's true faith, there's no call for magic. Puck's slow smile broadened all over his face. But what have boots to do with it, said Una, perching on the gate. There's cold iron in them, said Puck, and settled beside her. Nails in the soles, I mean. It makes a difference. How? Can't you feel it does? You wouldn't like to go back to bare feet again, same as last year, would you? Not really. No, I suppose I shouldn't, not for always. I'm growing up, you know, said Una. But you told us last year in the long slip at the theatre that you didn't mind cold iron, said Dan. I don't, but folk in Hausen, as the people of the hills call them, must be ruled by cold iron. So the people of the hills call people human, normal people, what we think is normal people, as folk in Hausen, houses, must be ruled by cold iron. Folk in Hausen are born on the near side of cold iron. There's iron in every man's house. Isn't there? They handle cold iron every day of their lives, and their fortunes made or spoilt by cold iron in some shape or another. That's how it goes with flesh and blood, and one can't prevent it." "I don't quite see. How do you mean?" said Dan. "It would take me some time to tell you." "Oh, it's ever so long to breakfast," said Dan. "We looked in the larder before we came out." He unpocketed one huge hunk of bread, and Una another, which they shared with Puck. "That's little Lyndon's baking," he said, as his white teeth sunk into it. "I know Mrs. Vincey's hand." He ate with a slow sideways thrust and grind of his jaw, just like old Hobden, and, like Hobden, hardly dropped a crumb. The sun flashed on little Lyndon's windows, and the cloudless sky grew stiller and hotter in the valley. "Ah, cold iron," he said at last to the impatient children. "Folkenhausen, as the people of the hills say, grow so careless about cold iron. They'll nail the horseshoe over the front door and forget to put it over the back. Then, some time or other, the people of the hills slip in, find the cradle babe in the corner and—" "Oh, I know! Steal it and leave a changeling!" Una cried. "No," said Puck firmly. "All that talk of changelings is people's excuse for their own neglect. Never believe 'em. I'd whip 'em at the cart tail through 3 parishes if I had my way." "But they don't do it now," said Una. "Whip or neglect children. Some folks in some fields never alter, but the people of the hills didn't work any changeling tricks. They'd tiptoe in and whisper and weave round the cradle babe in the chimney corner, a fag end of charm here or a half spell there, like kettles singing. But when the babe's mind came to bud out afterwards, it would act differently from other people in its station. That's no advantage to man or maid, so I wouldn't allow it with my folks' babies here. I told Sir Huon so once." "Who was Sir Huon?" Dan asked, and Puck turned on him in quiet astonishment. "Sir Huon of Bordeaux. He succeeded King Oberon. He had been a bold knight once, but he was lost on the road to Babylon a long while back. Have you ever read How Many Miles to Babylon?" "Of course," said Dan, flushing. "It's another poem, I think. This is something where—" Sorry, I just need to move my chair and get it in the right place. Kipling read a lot of poetry and English history and European history and all that sort of stuff. It was part of the lifestyle that they had at the time, the sort of education that you received at the time. And he often references a lot of that sort of thing. So he references poetry and history that we're not familiar with these days. And so, sorry, not quite. I'll put it back there. Maybe that'll help with some of the subtitle heights. Actually, that's a thought. If I put it down to 2 lines of subtitles, I wonder if that makes a difference to how high it sticks up. Ooh, that's better. So you just have to pay attention to the words. Maybe I can make the lines slightly longer so it doesn't lose them. Caption timeout, no. How long are the lines? I thought it said something about them. Nope. It doesn't have anything about how long the lines are. I know where that is. It's in the other browser thing, which I'm not going to do, sorry. I will work on that. I will have to practice. That's going to be a little bit difficult because I need to do it while I can see it to see the effect it's going to make. It's a little bit of a nuisance. Unless... No, my computer is still working really hard at the moment. I'm not going to try that now. I'll try that some other time, hopefully. Right, so we'll carry on. So Puck has just referenced How Many Miles to Babylon, which I think is a poem, but I'm not sure. Anyway, "Of course," said Dan, flushing. Well, Sir Huon was young when that song was new, but about tricks on mortal babies, I said to Sir Huon in the fern here, on just such a morning as this, if you crave to act an influence on folk in Hausen, which I know is your desire, why don't you take some human cradle babe by fair dealing, and bring him up among yourselves on the far side of cold iron, as Oberon did in time past. Then you could make him a splendid fortune and send him out into the world. Time past is past time, says Sir Huon. I doubt if we could do it. For one thing, the babe would have to be taken without wronging man, woman, or child. For another, he'd have to be born on the far side of cold iron, in some house where no cold iron ever stood. And for yet the third, he'd have to be kept from cold iron all his days, till we find him his fortune. No, it's not easy, he said, and he rode off, thinking. You see, Sir Huon had been a man once. I happened to attend Lewes Market next Woden's Day even. Woden's Day? Wednesday? Look at the way the word Wednesday is written. It's a Wednesday, and it comes from Woden. I happened to attend Lewes Market next Woden's Day even, that's the evening, and watched the slaves being sold there, same as pigs are sold at Robertsbridge Market nowadays, only the pigs have rings on their noses and the slaves had rings round their necks. What sort of rings? Said Dan. A ring of cold iron, 4 fingers wide and a thumb thick. So that's thick. That's like 3 inches wide and a thumb thick, so that's like half an inch thick. So there's no way you can get out of that as a slave. But with a snap to it, for to snap round the slave's neck. Oh, sorry, hang on. And a thumb thick, just like a quoit. A quoit is a ring made out of rope, which is used for throwing. When you play quoits, you have a stick that's poked into the ground, and you have these rings out of rope. They're about this round, and you throw them like you throw a frisbee, and try to get them to drop down over the stick. And the person who gets the most on the stick, I think, is the person who wins. It's a little bit like playing horseshoes, same sort of idea, except with a different shape that you're throwing because it has a different effect. And quoits were also used for when you had when you had a throwing line, so it's a lightweight, like rope but thinner, not string, and you wanted to take a heavier rope over something, you would sometimes use a quoit as the weight at the end to throw it with. Sailors didn't. They actually had a different sort of they had a monkey's fist, which was a piece of rope that's wound around itself and woven through itself, and it's a great big lump like this of rope on the end of a thinner string, and the weight on that meant that the rope that they were throwing would go a lot further, and so I think that quoits were also used in a similar manner. But most of us know of quoits as being the things that you throw to play a game. So a ring of a cold iron, 4 fingers wide and a thumb thick, just like a quoit, Quoit, in case you need to look it up, but with a snap to it, for to snap round the slave's neck. So it can be hinged open and then clipped closed. They used to do a big trade in slave rings at the forge here, and ship them to all parts of old England, packed in oak sawdust. But as I was saying, there was a farmer out of the Weald, which is the clay lands between the North Downs and the South Downs. The North Downs and the South Downs are made largely of limestone or chalk. Limestone's related. And then the top of it was originally a big piece of land that was worn this shape, and it's layers of chalk, which is compressed sea shells from various sea creatures that were under the sea, and then the land is pushed up, and then under that layer is sand, and under that layer again is clay, which is super fine. The difference between clay and sand, you can see the grittiness and feel the grittiness in sand. Clay, the particles are so fine that they stick together really tightly. So the North Downs and the South Downs are where this big land shape was like this, and then it got worn away and worn away and worn away. And so you still got the edges like this, and then it comes down, and you've got chalk, and then you've got sand, and that's called the green sands. And the green sands way is a trackway that follows along that edge through the landscape in Kent, Sussex, East and West Sussex, and Surrey, along the edges of the North Downs and the South Downs. And then in between those two hill lines, you have the lower lands, which it's still hilly. Most of the ground there is clay, heavy clay, and it's used for different purposes. And I was telling you that for a reason. The Weald, that area, the clay lands in between the North Downs and South Downs, is called the Weald, W-E-A-L-D. There you go. And you can go hiking along those trackways, and there's lots of them. And along the downs, there's also trackways as well, not just on the green sands. The green sands ones were used as a way of getting from one place to another, because even in wet weather the ground wasn't as gluggy as clay is, and then up on the downs it's thin soil on top of this chalk, and so it's great for grazing sheep on, the type of grass that grows, and grass and herbs that grow there. And also they could actually create what they call dew ponds, which is a little hollow in the chalk that is then the surface is coated with very, very fine clay, and it catches the dew from the hillside in it, so it works as a water supply for the grazing animals. All sorts of things to do with the history of the landscape. It's worth having a find out about it. And then if you ever get a chance to go hiking, tramping, whatever, over there, going and having a look. And there are still some old dew ponds on parts of the downs, but not very many. Anyway, so we were talking about the Weald. As I was saying, there was a farmer out of the Weald who had bought a woman with a babe in her arms, and he didn't want any encumbrances to her driving his beasts home for him. So she was a slave, and therefore he had bought her. Beast himself, said Una, and kicked her bare heel on the gate. So he blamed the auctioneer. It's none of my baby, the wench puts in. I took it off a woman in our gang who died on Terrible Down yesterday. I'll take it off to the church then, says the farmer. Mother Church will make a monk of it, and we'll step along home. It was dusk then. He slipped down to St. Pancras Church and laid the babe at the cold chapel door. I breathed on the back of his stooping neck. And I've heard he never could be warm at any fire afterwards. So Puck basically was teaching him a lesson for abandoning the baby. I should have been surprised if he could. Then I whipped up the babe and came flying home here like a bat to its belfry. On the dewy break of morning of Thor's own day, Thursday, just such a day as this, I laid the babe outside the hill here, and the people flocked up and wondered at the sight. You've brought him then, Sir Huon said, staring like any mortal man. Yes, and he's brought his mouth with him too, I said. The babe was crying loud for his breakfast. What is he? Says Sir Huon, when the women folk had drawn him under to feed him. Full moon and morning star may know, I says. I don't. By what I could make out of him in the moonlight, he's without brand or blemish. I'll answer for it that he's born on the far side of Cold Iron, for he was born under a shore on the Terrible Down. A shore. Not sure, but maybe a haystack type thing. Not in a normal context he would have been born in. That was what that was about. On Terrible Down, and I've wronged neither man nor woman nor child in taking him, for he is the son of a dead slave woman. All to the good, Robin, Sir Huon said. He'll be the less anxious to leave us. Oh, we'll give him a splendid fortune, and he shall act an influence on folk in Hausen as we have always craved. His lady came up then and drew him under to watch the babe's wonderful doings. Who was his lady? Said Dan. The Lady Esclarmonde. She had been a woman once, till she followed Sir Huon across the fern, as we say. Babies are no special treat to me. I've watched too many of them, so I stayed on the hill. Presently I heard hammering down at the forge there. Puck pointed towards Hobden's cottage. It was too early for any workmen, but it passed through my mind that the breaking day was Thor's own day. A slow north-east wind blew up and set the oaks sawing and fretting in a way I remembered, so I slipped over to see what I could see. And what did you see? A smith forging something or other out of cold iron. When it was finished, he weighed it in his hand, his back was towards me, and tossed it from him a longish quoit throw down the valley. I saw cold iron flash in the sun, but I couldn't quite make out where it fell. That didn't trouble me. I knew it would be found sooner or later by someone. How did you know? Dan went on. Because I knew the smith that made it, said Puck quietly. Wayland Smith, Una suggested. That's a character we've had in the previous story. And if you want to know what the previous story, how the previous story went, go over to my YouTube channel. I'll give you the link now for the channel, not the playlist, and look for the playlist for Puck of Pook's Hill. So here's the YouTube playlist channel, and you can click on that link there. And I'm obviously talking to people who are watching this live on Twitch, not the people who are watching this as a recording on YouTube, because you're already on YouTube and you can find it by clicking on my name and then going to playlists. Right. Wayland Smith, Una suggested. No, I should have passed the time of day with Wayland Smith, of course. This other was different. So Puck made a queer crescent in the air with his finger. I counted the blades of grass under my nose till the wind dropped and he had gone, he and his hammer. Was it Thor then? Una murmured under her breath. Who else? It was Thor's own day. Puck repeated the sign. I didn't tell Sir Huon or his lady what I'd seen. Borrow trouble for yourself if that's your nature, but don't lend it to your neighbours. That's a good saying. Shall we write this one down? I'm going to. Have you got your... I should have hinted that it's a good idea to have a pen or pencil and paper handy. So we shall write this down. I'll say it again. Borrow trouble for yourself if that's your nature. But don't lend it to your neighbours. There you go. I've written it down, have you? We'll carry on. Borrow trouble for yourself if that's your nature, but don't lend it to your neighbours. Moreover, I might have been mistaken about the smith's work. He might have been making things for mere amusement, though it wasn't like him, or he might have thrown away an old piece of made iron. One can never be sure. So I held my tongue and enjoyed the babe. He was a wonderful child, and the people of the hills were so set on him they wouldn't have believed me. He took to me wonderfully. As soon as he could walk, he'd putter forth with me all about my hill here. Fern makes soft falling. In other words, as a learning to toddle, he wouldn't have been harmed walking around on the hillside because the ferns would have padded the fall. He knew that when day broke on earth above, for he'd thump, thump, thump like an old buck rabbit in a bury, and I'd hear him say, "Uppy," till someone who knew the charm let him out, and then it would be "Robin, Robin," all round Robin Hood's barn, as we say, till he'd found me. The dear, said Una, I'd like to have seen him. So, because they live underground, that's what they're needing to be let out. Yes, he was a boy, and when it came to learning his words, spells and such like, he'd sit on the hill in the long shadows, worrying out bits of charms to try on passers-by. And when the bird flew to him or the tree bowed to him for pure love's sake, like everything else on my hill, he'd shout, "Robin, look, see, Robin," and sputter out some spell or other that they had taught him, all wrong end first, till I hadn't the heart to tell him it was his own dear self and not the words that worked the wonder. When he got more abreast of his words and could cast spells for sure, as we say, he took more and more notice of things and people in the world. People, of course, always drew him, for he was mortal all through. Seeing that he was free to move among folk in housen under or over cold iron, I used to take him along with me night walking, where he could watch folk, and I could keep him from touching cold iron. That wasn't so difficult as it sounds, because there are plenty of things besides cold iron in housen to catch a boy's fancy. He was a handful, though. I shan't forget when I took him to Little Linden's, his first night under a roof, the smell of the rushlights and the bacon on the beams. Bacon. A leg of pork is dried, is coated in salt, various salts, and dried, and often it's smoked at the same time, and then to preserve it, so you have meat ongoing, because it was long before the days of fridges. And then to have access to it, you hung it from the roof beams, maybe in the room that you live in, if you only have a small room, or if you're in a bigger room, then in a separate space. Don't know. Anyway, so that's what bacon hanging from the beams. They were stuffing a feather bed too, and it was a drizzling warm night. Got into his head. Before I could stop him, we were hiding in the bakehouse, he'd whipped up a storm of wildfire with flashlights and voices, which sent the folk shrieking into the garden, and a girl overset a hive there, and of course he didn't know till then such things could touch him. He got badly stung and came home with his face looking like kidney potatoes. You can imagine how angry Sir Huon and Lady Esclarmonde were with poor Robin. They said the boy was never to be trusted with me night walking any more, and he took about as much notice of their order as he did of the bee stings. Night after night, as soon as it was dark, I'd pick up his whistle in the wet fern, and off we'd flit together among folk in housen till break of day. He asking questions and I answering according to my knowledge. Then we fell into mischief again. Puck shook till the gate rattled. I'm thinking that's shaking with laughter, but suppressed. We came across a man up at Brightling who was beating his wife with a bat in the garden. I was just going to toss the man over his own wood lump when the boy jumped the hedge and ran at him. Of course, the woman took her husband's part, and while the man beat him, the woman scratted his face. It wasn't till I danced among the cabbages, like Brightling beacon all ablaze, that they gave up and ran indoors. Yes, because Puck doesn't always appear to humans the way the boy would have been seeing him, and so he would have, yes, quite frightened them. Anyway, just one of those things. Just got to open up a notepad file, which shouldn't overload my computer because it's such a small program. One of the reasons why it gets used. Anyway, I danced among the cabbages like Brightling beacon, all ablaze, that they gave up and ran indoors. Brightling beacon was a fire point on top of a hill as a signal beacon, probably up on the downs actually, I would think. And so that's what he's drawing the example to. And probably at the time that this was written, the people who were reading it would have understood, because it was the location and what it had been used for was something that was generally known. They ran indoors. The boy's fine green and gold clothes were all torn to pieces, and he had been welted in 20 places with the man's bat and scratched by the woman's nails to pieces. Scratched. He looked like a Robertsbridge hopper on a Monday morning. I have no idea what a Robertsbridge hopper is. Robin, said he, while I was trying to clean him down with a bunch of hay, I don't quite understand folk in housen. I went to help that old woman and she hit me, Robin. What else did you expect? I said. That was the one time when you might have worked one of your charms instead of running into 3 times your weight. I didn't think, he said. But I caught the man one on the head that was as good as any charm. Did you see it work, Robin? Mind your nose, I said. Bleed it on a dock leaf, not your sleeve, for pity's sake. I knew what the Lady Esclamond would say. He didn't care. He was as happy as a gypsy with a stolen pony, and the front part of his gold coat, all blood and grass stains, looked like ancient sacrifices. All the blood from his blood nose. Of course, the people of the hills laid the blame on me. The boy could do nothing wrong in their eyes. You are bringing him up to act and influence on Folkenhausen when you're ready to let him go, I said. Now he's begun to do it. Why do you cry shame on me? That's no shame. It's his nature drawing him to his kind. But we don't want him to begin that way, said Lady Esclamond. We intend a splendid fortune for him, not your flitter-by-night, hedge-jumping gypsy work. I don't blame you, Robin, says Sir Huon, but I do think you might look after the boy more closely. I've kept him away from cold iron these 16 years, I said. You know as well as I do, the first time he touches cold iron, he'll find his own fortune in spite of everything you intend for him. You owe me something for that. Sir Huon, having been a man who was going to allow me the right of it, but the Lady Esclamond, being the mother of all mothers, over-persuaded him. We are very grateful, Sir Huon said, but we think that just for the present you are about too much with him on the hill. Though you have said it, I said, I will give you a second chance. I did not like being called to account for my doings on my own hill. I wouldn't have stood it even that far, except I loved the boy. No, says Lady Esclamond. He's never any trouble when he's left to me and himself. It's your fault. You have said it, I answered. Hear me, from now on till the boy has found his fortune, whatever that may be, I vow to you all on my hill, by oak and ash and thorn, and by the hammer of Asa Thor, again Puck made that curious double cut in the air, that you may leave me out of all your counts and reckonings. Then I went out, he snapped his fingers, like the puff of a candle, and though they cried and called, they made nothing by it. I didn't promise not to keep an eye on the boy, though. I watched him close. When he found what his people had forced me to do, he gave them a piece of his mind, but they all kissed and cried around him. And being only a boy, he came over to their way of thinking. I don't blame him. And called himself unkind and ungrateful, and it all ended in fresh shows and plays and magics to distract him from Folkenhausen. Dear heart alive, how he used to call on me, and I couldn't answer or even let him know that I was near. Not even once, said Una, if he was very lonely. No, he couldn't, said Dan, who had been thinking. Didn't you swear by the hammer of Thor that you wouldn't, Puck? By that hammer, was the deep rumbled reply. Then he came back to his soft-speaking voice, and the boy was lonely when he couldn't see me any more. He tried to learn all learning. He had good teachers. But I saw him lift his eyes from the big black books towards Folkenhausen all the time. He studied song-making. Good teacher he had too. But he sung those songs with his back toward the hill and his face toward folk. I know. I have sat and grieved over him, grieving within a rabbit's jump of him. Then he studied the high, low, and middle magic. He had promised the Lady Esclamond he would never go near Folkenhausen, so he had to make shows and shadows for his mind to chew on. What sort of shows? Said Dan. Just boys' magic, as we say. I'll show you some sometime. It pleased him for a while, and it didn't hurt anyone in particular except a few men coming home late from taverns. But I knew what it was a sign of, and I followed him like a weasel follows a rabbit. As good a boy as ever lived. I have seen him with Sir Huon and the Lady Esclamond, stepping just as they stepped, to avoid the track of cold iron in a furrow, or walking wide of some old ash tot, because a man had left his swap hook or a spade there, and all his heart aching to go straight forward among folk in housen all the time. Oh, a good boy. They always intended a fine fortune for him, but they could never find it in their hearts to let him begin. I've heard that many warned them, but they wouldn't be warned, so it happened as it happened. One hot night, I saw the boy roving about here wrapped in his flaming discontents. There was flash on flash against the clouds and rush on rush of shadows down the valley till the shores were full of his hounds giving tongue. The shores appear to be like the valleys or the clusters of trees in certain places. Were full of his hounds giving tongue, and the woodways were packed with his knights in armour riding down into the water mists, all his own magic, of course. Behind them you could see great castles lifting slow and splendid on arches of moonshine, with maidens waving their hands at the windows, which all turned into roaring rivers, and then would come the darkness of his own young heart, wiping out the whole slateful. But boy's magic doesn't trouble me, or Merlin's either for that matter. I followed the boy by the flashes and the whirling wildfire of his discontent, and oh, but I grieved for him. Oh, but I grieved for him. He pounded back and forth like a bullock in a strange pasture, sometimes alone, sometimes waist deep among his shadow hounds, sometimes leading his shadow knights on a hawk-winged horse to rescue his shadow girls. I never guessed he had such magic at his command, but it is often the way with boys. Just when the owl comes home for the second time, I saw Sir Huon and the lady ride down my hill, where there is not much magic allowed except mine. They were very pleased that the boy's magic, the valley flared with it. They were very pleased at the boy's magic. The valley flared with it, and I heard them settling his splendid fortune when they should find it in their hearts to let him go to act and influence among folk in housen. Sir Huon was for making him a great king somewhere or other, and the lady was for making him a marvellous wise man, whom all should praise for his skill and kindness. She was very kind-hearted. Of a sudden we saw the flashes of his discontent turn back on the clouds, and his shadow hounds stopped baying. Sorry, sudden tickle in the back of my throat. Sorry, carrying on. "There's magic fighting magic over yonder," the Lady Esclamond cried, reined up. "Who is against him?" I could have told her, but I did not count it any of my business to speak of Asa Thor's comings and goings. "How did you know?" said Una. A slow north-east wind blew up, sawing and fretting through the oaks in a way I remembered. The wildfire roared up one last time in one sheet and snuffed out like a rushlight, and a bucketful of stinging hail fell. We heard the boy walking in the long slip where I first met you. "Here, oh, come here," said the Lady Esclamond, and stretched out her arms in the dark. She's trying to protect him. He was coming slowly, but he stumbled in the footpath, being, of course, mortal man. "Why, what's this?" he said to himself. We three heard him. "Hold, lad, hold! Wear cold iron!" "Beware of cold iron," said Sir Huon, and they too swept down like nightjars, crying as they strode. I ran up at their stirrups, but it was too late. We felt that the boy had touched cold iron somewhere in the dark, for the horses of the hill shied off and whipped round, snorting. Then I judged it was time for me to show myself in my own shape. So I did. "Whatever it is," I said, "he has taken hold of it. Now we must find out whatever it is that he has taken hold of, for that will be his fortune." "Come here, Robin," the boy shouted as soon as he heard my voice. "I don't know what I've got hold of." "It is in your hands," I called back. "Tell us if it is hard and cold, with jewels atop, for that will be a king's sceptre." Not by a furrow long, he said, and stooped and tugged in the dark. We heard him. Has it a handle and 2 cutting edges? I called, for that'll be a knight's sword. No, it hasn't, he says. It's neither ploughshare, whittle, hook, nor crook, nor aught I've yet seen men handle. By this time he was scratching in the dirt to prize it up. Whatever it is, you know who put it there, Robin, said Sir Huon to me, or you would not ask those questions. You should have told me as soon as you knew. What could you or I have done against the smith that made it and laid it for him to find? I asked, and I whispered to Sir Huon what I had seen at the forge on Thor's Day, when the babe was first brought to the hill. Oh, goodbye, our dreams, said Sir Huon. It's neither sceptre, sword, nor plough. Maybe yet it's a book of learning, bound with iron clasps. There's a chance for a splendid fortune in that sometimes. But we knew we were only speaking to comfort ourselves, and the Lady Esclairmonde, having been a woman, said so. Thur, help us, the boy called. It is round, without end, cold iron, 4 fingers wide, and a thumb thick, and there is writing on the breadth of it. Read the writing, if you have the learning, I called. The darkness had lifted by then, and the owl was out over the fern again. He called back, reading the runes on the iron. Few can see further forth than when the child meets the cold iron. And there he stood in clear starlight, with a new, heavy, shining slave ring round his proud neck. Is this how it goes? He asked, while the Lady Esclairmonde cried. That is how it goes, I said. He hadn't snapped the catch home yet, though. What fortune does it mean for him? Said Sir Huon, while the boy fingered the ring. You who walk under cold iron must tell us and teach us. Tell I can, but teach I cannot, I said. The virtue of the ring is only that he must go among folk in Hausen henceforward, doing what they want done, or what he knows they need. All old England over, never will he be his own master, nor yet ever any man's. He will get half he gives, and give twice what he gets, till his life's last breath, and if he lays aside his load before he draws that last breath, all his work will go for naught. Oh, cruel, wicked Thor, cried Lady Esclairmonde. Ah, look, see all of you, the catch is still open. He hasn't locked it. He can still take it off. He can still come back. Come back. She went as near as she dared, but she could not lay hands on cold iron. The boy could have taken it off, yes. We waited to see if he would, but he put up his hand, and the snap locked home. What else could I have done? He said. Surely then you will do, I said. Morning's coming, and if you 3 have any farewells to make them now, for after sunrise cold iron must be your master. So the 3 sat down, cheek by wet cheek, telling over their farewells till morning light. As good a boy as ever lived he was. And what happened to him? Said Dan. When morning came, cold iron was master of him and his fortune, and he went to work among folk in Hausen. Presently he came across a maid, like-minded with himself, and they were wedded, and had bushels of children, as the saying is. Perhaps you'll meet some of his breed this year. Thank you, said Una, but what did poor Lady Esclairmonde do? What can you do when Asa Thor lays the cold iron in a lad's path? She and her Sir Huon were comforted to think that they had given the boy good store of learning, to act and influence on folk in Hausen, for he was a good boy. Isn't it getting on for breakfast time? I'll walk with you a piece. When they were well in the centre of the bone-dry fern, Dan nudged Una, who stopped and put on a boot as quickly as she could. Now, she said, you can't get any oak, ash and thorn leaves from here, and, she balanced wildly on one leg, I'm standing on cold iron. What'll you do if we don't go away? Of all mortal impudence, said Puck, as Dan, also in one boot, grabbed his sister's hand to steady himself. He walked round them, shaking with delight. You think I can only work with a handful of dead leaves? This comes of taking away your doubt and fear. I'll show you. A minute later, they charged into old Hobden at his simple breakfast of cold roast pheasant, shouting that there was a wasp's nest in the fern which they had nearly stepped on, and asking him to come and smoke it out. It's too early for wapses' nests, and I don't go digging in the hill, not for shillings, said the old man placidly. You've a thorn in your foot, Miss Una. Sit down and put on your t'other boot. You're too old to be capering barefoot on an empty stomach. Stay it with this chicken of mine. Stay your stomach, because you're hungry. And that's the end of the chapter, but we shall have the poem that comes at the end of the chapter. Cold Iron. Gold is for the mistress, silver for the maid, copper for the craftsman, cunning at his trade. Good, said the Baron, sitting in his hall, but iron, cold iron, is master of them all. So he made rebellion 'gainst the king his liege, camped before his citadel and summoned it to siege. Nay, said the cannoneer on the castle wall, but iron, cold iron, shall be master of you all. Woe for the Baron and his knights so strong, when the cruel cannon-balls laid him all along. He was taken prisoner, he was cast in thrall. Locked up. And iron, cold iron, was master of it all. Yet his king spake kindly, O how kind a lord! What if I release thee now and give thee back thy sword? Nay, said the Baron, mock not at my fall, for iron, cold iron, is master of men all. Tears are for the craven, prayers are for the clown, halters for the silly neck that cannot keep a crown. As my loss is grievous, so my hope is small, for iron, cold iron, must be master of all. Yet his king made answer, few such kings there be. Here is bread and here is wine, sit and sup with me. Eat and drink in Mary's name, the whiles I do recall how iron, cold iron, can be master of men all. He took the wine and blessed it. He blessed and brake the bread. With his own hands he served them, and presently he said, Look, these hands they pierced with nails outside my city wall. Show iron, cold iron, to be master of men all. Wounds are for the desperate, blows are for the strong, balm and oil for weary hearts, all cut and bruised with wrong. I forgive thy treason, I redeem thy fall, for iron, cold iron, must be master of men all. Crowns are for the valiant, sceptres for the bold, thrones and powers for mighty men who dare to take and hold. Nay, said the Baron, kneeling in his hall, but iron, cold iron, is master of man all. Iron out of Calvary is master of man all. And that's the end of the first reading. The next section is called Gloriana, and it starts with a poem. And that's the end of today. So we shall see you next time. Go and look for pictures, illustrations, maps, caricatures even, of the characters that we've had in the book. See if any of the characters that are mentioned in there have any historical background. Sir Huon and Lady, what was her name? Let's see if we can find her name again. Esclairmonde. Esclairmonde. I wonder if she's based on a real person. That's interesting. We'll find out maybe. So go and find those and share them over with us on Discord. Here you go, Discord. That's your link. And if you want to listen to some more stories, look on my YouTube channel. I have playlists there which are collections of the videos for each of the books that I've read. And I'll see you next time. If you are following me on Twitch, it'll notify you when I go live. If you subscribe to me on YouTube and then click the bell icon, it will that YouTube will notify you when I put up a new video. So don't miss out, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for listening. Bye.